This is 508, podcast about Worcester.
We welcome for the first time Jeff Barnard of WormtownTaxi.com. Jeff, how are you doing?
Oh, doing all right this morning. Nice to have 4 days off in a row.
Yeah, normally I guess you're driving this time of day?
Yeah, I find it would be almost impossible to be able to participate in the show while driving the taxi because 8 a.m. on a Friday morning is multitasking time even without a cell phone in my ear. It's difficult enough to focus on driving through this city during rush hour, having a passenger in the back seat who may say something important as at any moment, like, you got to take a left here. Along with the computer dispatch system, which has a little screen off to my right. Yeah, it's a real maze in this city.
All right.
What's the top story of the week?
There is no top story. There's never a top story in Worcester. Even though the Telegram and Gazette tries, and they're earnest about it. I don't think they're trying to bamboozle us, but they try so hard to have a top story on the front page of that paper every day, and it's not a top story. It never is.
Just something else happening in this city.
It's usually something that didn't happen in Worcester. But when it does happen in Worcester, here's a funny one. There's a couple of weeks ago, yellow cab number 98 went to take a turn onto some street off of Main Street, and he ended up hung up on this frozen snowbank with all four wheels off the ground, and the TNG got a great picture of it, and that was their front page story. So although that wasn't technically a top story, it was physically a top story with the cab atop the big ice ball.
Do you have any suggestions for how they should be ranking stories or non-ranking stories?
I think it should be all local. You know, what's the point of having every paper in the country printing the same headline from AP?
Mm-hmm.
What's the point?
Well, I mean, obviously, I think that the point is for people who are not internet users or don't also subscribe to the Globe.
The Glob.
To find out what the story is. I mean, I think that there's less and less of that, but
if they have a TV set, they'll know the top story that's going to be in the Gazette. So what's the point?
That's true.
Why don't they print the news you can't get anywhere else, which is, Worcester and Worcester County? I think there's more content that they could print, but they just don't. And they don't look for it either.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem to be that the paradigm has quite shifted at the Telegram yet.
And I think that's one of the main problems in education right now is that there isn't the time given to kids' emotional processing or the way that they're interacting with their peers. It's just you have 30 kids in a classroom and you have to manage that situation. You have to keep that situation safe, maybe teach something along the line, but a lot of what teachers and administrators have to do with that size of a situation is just keep it okay.
Keep a lid on it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I can see that.
It's all about control.
Yeah. It's hard.
Jeff, you're like a generation older than everybody else in this
At
city.
least one generation, maybe two.
When I was in school, mostly in Oklahoma, so I always have to wonder if this is a New England versus West thing. But kids would bring like shell casings to school. Kids would bring Chinese stars. Occasionally, kids would bring like a knife or a sword or something to show off at school. And I don't remember anybody ever getting suspended. I mean, it probably was not something that would be frowned upon, but there wasn't like a lot of concern. Whenever you were in school, do you feel like there was a lot of...
I was in grade school in the 50s and high school in the 60s, and there was absolutely no part of the subjective universe that even considered any of this.
What does that mean?
It means that the entire
Public school education
ability to conceive of whether students would be dangerous or not wasn't even there.
because they're small.
Because they're a bunch of kids.
Yeah. Yeah, well, even in high school, the only... I would have to say that we were much more subdued in the 50s and 60s than today. We weren't exposed to a lot of the violence in TV and movies that kids are today. I don't think that has the biggest impact, though. The biggest impact is parents who are in fear. Parents who are in fear that their children are going to get harmed in some way. And my parents didn't feel that.
Yeah.
They when I went to school, it was great. Get these kids out of the house. And when we had family get-togethers, they'd lock the door. So we had to stay outside.
Yeah.
I mean, we were just like these kids. Oh, they're such an annoyance all the time.
I've heard people claim.
So we got to do what we wanted.
I've heard people claim, and I'm of course a pacifist, so I don't think this is necessarily a good thing. But I've heard people claim that part of the vibe of the '50s was that most of the adult males in the country knew how to kill a man with a gun, and many of them had done it.
Well, as veterans, I would say.
Yeah, exactly. That like
World War
in the
II,
'50s, people had
veterans.
most of the adult males in the country had been connected with the war in some way.
I have to say that as a kid growing up in those times, I felt afraid of doing a lot of things. There were things that I probably would have been enabled to do today
Mm-hmm.
by the atmosphere
Right.
today, which would enable me. But
Mm-hmm.
back then, I was just too scared of getting in trouble.
Yeah.
I still got into trouble, but nonetheless, when I did get into trouble, a teacher could smack me in the face.
Yeah. Well,
I don't think that's the answer, but I was afraid. And most of the kids that I grew up with have we've talked about this, that there's some element of difference, and we can't pinpoint it. We can't figure out what exactly it is, but as kids, we were afraid of the adults. And it wasn't because they were mistreating us or they were didn't like us or anything like that. There was just this tremendous amount of respect for the adults. You didn't cross them, and when you did get into trouble, it was heart stopping if you got caught.
And
Absolutely
you guys
heart stopping.
Well, as long as they focus on news, and especially local news, 34 people I counted, added up all the reporters that you were talking about, Scott, in your posting on Wisteria, and I counted 34 reporters for covering local and regional news.
Yeah, and I mean, think about that, though, guys. I mean, that's 34 to cover this area, but also to cover major areas north and south.
So it's like 500,000 people, basically.
Yeah. I mean, that's nothing.
Yep.
At the same time, though, you use those people smart, and you can really do a nice job. And I'm real interested to see how the restructuring works. I mean, look, if they do it how they say they're going to do it, I think it'll work. But you start making compromises anytime you start a plan like this, and that's where it falls apart.
Right. Yeah, well, the culture is defined from the top down. Whoever's in charge is going to set the tone. Encounters with bears. One guy up in Gardner hit a bear while riding his motorcycle on Route 101. And another guy, I forget which town he was in, was fishing and got almost attacked by a bear. And then 2 days ago, they had to, there was one down around the Auburn line of I-9. Got these bears crawling out of the woods everywhere. He didn't go there with rain. I'm just carrying my coffee over to a spot to sit down here.
All right, we'll get
There we go.
We will get to hear the caffeine enter your system. I hear it takes 20 minutes for the caffeine to go into the blood after you've ingested it. So people can set their watches now.
It seems instant, though. Hold on. Nice, fresh brewed coffee.
There are city councilors who are willing to fight against this vendor stuff to the bitter end, I guess. People should come down to the council meeting or write their councilor if they want to support the vendors.
Yeah, this one is not dead at all, Mike. And I think it's going to... Councilor Palpatine could actually end up having a stroke this week if things play out appropriately.
Oh, no, I need to figure out what you mean by Councilor Palpatine.
He's the guy who represents Shrewsbury Street. What is that, District 2? Is that District 2? What district is that? District 1?
That's my district.
There you go.
He ran unopposed.
I know.
I love it.
He did pretty well, too, in that election, I have to say.
For being unopposed.
Well, Mike Germain replied to this email. He replied to the whole group, and Chief Gemme didn't like that. So it's become this awesome sort of like sitcom-ish back and forth between a city councilor, the chief of police, and a city manager playing referee for the whole thing.
Well, you said something about a week back. I was like questioning, how long has you had a week back? Oh, about a week back.
Foiled again.
Put a cherry on it.
Bruce, that laugh didn't sound really evil enough. Try another one.
Yeah. Jeff Barnard, you actually called for Germain to resign over this. Can you explain that?
It was definitely a knee-jerk reaction on my part.
Do you do you have a...
You know he's got another joke.
Bruce, do you have a joke based on that?
No.
All right.
You should.
I don't think he should resign. What an embarrassment, to have a city councilor popping his cork like that.
Let's use the corkscrew.
So I'm only bringing this because Brendan and Jeff have gone back and forth in some blog comments about...
No, I trust that Brendan has a more sane viewpoint on the whole thing than I do.
That's very charitable of you.
And I would certainly vote for Brendan as a city councilor before I vote for Mike
That is a huge step in a completely ass-backwards direction. Yeah, I would not make that sort of assumption about me at all. I make it as I go along. I just do it with a straight face.
You could create art specifically to be stolen. That's the Abby Hoffman approach.
But you're right. I mean, it's some sort of like really weird thing when someone discovers, I guess, the internet, and then like, wow, like there's this going on out there, and how do you define that, and what is it? It's I
just discovered it a year ago.
Yeah. Well, that's. I mean, Jeff, you're like. I mean, you would be like the poster child, or maybe the poster old man for blogging, because. I mean, you start blogging, and like immediately everybody's telling me like, oh, this guy has this blog, and it's about Worcester, and it's not terrible. Like it's amazing. We should read this every day. This is great. And now you got city councilors calling you up at home, and the whole deal.
This is just this total vacuum of content that you can jump into.
Yes. Brendan, I wanted to ask you about Diane Williamson violating FCC regulations also. If the Telegram and Gazette folds tomorrow, I don't even know what happens with that gap. Even online, there's just nothing to fill in, that there's just nothing to fill it in, and it seems like I don't see any path towards that.
No, there isn't. And who could afford to spend all their time, chasing down stories if they're not making a living at it?
Part-time cab driver?
Not really. I mean, there's no way. There's just absolutely no way that I could chase down stories like that or write them.
Well, I would point out though that like one of the many things that you do on your blog is like discuss road construction, and that's something where
it's because I have to drive on them every day.
Yeah, but that's something.
Every time I hit a bump, I go.
I mean, you do. You do the kind of road construction news.
Is it your car that makes that noise, or do you actually make that noise?
Me. I actually make that noise.
Stick your head out the window and make that noise.
It gets painful after a while in a cab.
I mean, you put together the road construction story though, in a sort of comprehensive, sometimes in the comprehensive way that Bill puts together the airport story. I mean,
Jeff does, but in the absence of a journalist with time on their hands, there's nobody digging to find out where did the money come for that, where was it shifted from, how much overtime is being spent.
What's it like to be a taxi driver in Worcester?
It's really weird. I just didn't expect it to be like this. To be so weird.
How long have you been driving a cab now?
I'd say 2.5 years full time.
Okay.
Interrupted by about a year dispatching. Mm-hmm. And on and off. Let's see. The first time I drove a cab in Worcester was the summer of 1970.
Okay.
And then again during about 8 months in 1983.
Okay.
And then I got laid off in mid-2002 and wrote out the unemployment, and in around March or April of 2003 I started driving, so it's actually 4 years.
Okay. Well, I got a question for you. When you were the dispatcher, that dispatcher, you probably made yourself a pretty good dispatcher. You can sit around and say, "What dispatch did I dispatch? Dispatcher that batch."
That was a disparaging remark about dispatchers from Bruce.
Oh, that's a good.
That probably is warranted in some cases. The dispatching and spatulas that come into play with dispatching and the batches of things that you have to do and deal with all the time. So it's really patches, yeah. It just really, it has...
Let it all pass by.
There was a song way back called Patches.
Do you have any questions to ask Bruce?
Oh, no. All my questions have been answered.
All right.
Bruce, do you have any final statement?
No.
Is there anything that you see being promising in 2010 in Worcester?
Well... Getting through 2010 is the main goal for me, because at the end of the year I turn 62 and I'll be able to collect my Social Security retirement.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward. That's what I'm looking forward to. Is the end of 2010.
There's a ton of news this week, guys. There's like a lot. It seems like there's a lot of long-going stories that have been resolved this week or are getting resolved sometime soon. Is there anything that's at the forefront of your minds?
Well, in the forefront of my mind is that the two longest-running significant complaints that residents of Worcester have been able to use to vent their frustration have come to a close this week.
This would be
in 2 short days. City Square has gotten its trigger tenant.
Okay.
And what was the other one? The airport was sold.
The airport was sold.
So this is like years in the making, and the climax to these two long-standing grievances. It's over.
Yeah.
And I feel this sudden sense of loss because what do we complain about?
That's the whole thing.
What will we complain about if City Square gets built and the airport is no longer a money pit for the city of Worcester? What are we going to complain about?
This is like at the end of Lord of the Rings when everybody's just going to well, what are we going to do? Well, some of us are going to go across the ocean and some of us are going to go about our lives.
Yeah,
but
this
the
is
great
not
adventure,
the climax. This is
the great epic.
This is really the denouement.
The great epic is done.
Worcester will now be a place where people have nothing to complain about.
Then what will we do?
Yeah.
What will our primary industry be?
Yeah.
We'll have to go back to punk rock or something.
Yeah. Very frustrating. Yeah, I'm trying to wean myself from the habit that I got into of depending on finding out what's going on in Worcester from the TNG, because I usually find out what's going on in Worcester before I find out in the TNG. And I end up looking at the TNG article to see how they're spinning it, basically. How are they spinning it? And, it's more of an opinion molding business than it is an informing business as far as I can see.
You think so? I feel like a lot of the stories I read at the Telegram I feel like are written by people who seems like they could care less, and that's why I actually don't like the article.
Yeah, I don't see that. I see that as a tired, having been beaten over the head in a business that's everybody says is failing, and that wears.
These
that
jerks
wears
in the
on.
woods
I worked
complain
in
about your
companies
website.
That were failing.
Yeah.
And the sense of morale is absent.
Yeah.
In many cases, and so I can imagine that has a very big effect on them. But I've seen lately that there's been some elan coming forth, with the Cover It Live stuff that they've been doing, and the investigative reporting with the video for parking. It's not a big deal, but it's innovative. Let's get out and do something. And I think that they're beginning to, feel a little bit more willing to feel young again. The other thing I wanted to show you was I got some swag from the City Square.
Oh, really? Wait a second.
Rick Rushton handed me this.
What?
And he wouldn't take it back. So, I brought it here in case...
That was a mean thing to do.
It was a mean thing to do, I'll tell you. And so if anybody wants this, you want it, Mike?
I do.
It's yours.
Wow. Jeff Barnard, not only a great blogger, but a generous American.
Nothing like good swag, huh?
Thank you so much. This is fantastic. How's it going, Jeff?
Well, today, or this general space of time, you know, this week, marks 6 months since I found out that I have cancer. And a lot has happened. I've gone through 2 months of chemotherapy back in June and July, which practically killed me. July into August was recuperation from that, and became much debilitated from my former self.
Yeah.
Atrophied muscles, weakness, slowly coming back into a state of feeling almost normal every day. But it's been 6 months since I was first diagnosed with the cancer, and so it's kind of a milestone. In August, the end of August, the oncologist bluntly told me I had 3 to 6 months to live. So, you know, I diligently counted September, October, November, so I could be dead by November. December, January, February. According to him, I will be dead by then. But it's not set in stone. I'm working on I have a whole list of places I've been calling down through over the last week about a new drug that is targeted. There's targeted therapy, and then there's blunderbuss therapy. Chemotherapy is blunderbuss. It just, you know, shoots at everything, tries to knock down the immune system or whatever it does. Who knows? But targeted therapy is specific types of cancer. I discovered in August and September there were a lot of articles about a drug that had been through a phase 2 clinical trial, which knocked out shrunk melanomas for about 7 or 8 months before it wore off. So, and that's in about 50 to 60% of the melanomas that people have. So I could be in that group. I could be able to get into a clinical trial to add 7 to 8 months to my life, which I'm diligently working on.
Yeah.
So that's where I'm at right now. In the 6 month, it's actually a 2-year milestone since I had the skin cancer, and it was a 1.5 years before it metastasized. So we're kind of at a milestone here. And it'll be interesting to me to see where I'm at 6 months from now.
Yeah, well, I hope you're still around.
Me too.
Yeah.